welcome to church this morning. One of the things that we're starting here, it's kind of a new concept for us, is celebrating Lent. We've never done this before, but we've started a few years back celebrating the season of Advent, which is the first 4 Sundays before Christmas. It's an opportunity where we have just to celebrate the birth of Jesus, and it doesn't happen just on December 25th. Well, we know that wasn't the real date, but it just doesn't happen on that day of celebration, but it happens, the focus is built up beforehand with the themes of hope, love, joy, and peace, and Lent is very similar. So for the 40 days before the Easter season, Lent gives us an opportunity to focus on the death and resurrection of Christ. It gives us an opportunity to focus on the sacrifice that he made for every single person, everywhere, for all time. And although we can never repay that price, we're not meant to repay that price, God's given us an opportunity to connect with him and to participate and kind of join in acts of sacrifice. And so for 40 days, we are asking that you simply give something up, something that you hold dear, something that you is part of your normal life. And the idea would be that as you sacrifice that, you're drawn to the remembrance of the sacrifice that he made for all of us. Last week, the first Sunday of Lent, we talked about the sign, the INRI. That's the first 4 initials of the Latin phrase, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And we reminded ourselves last week that Jesus truly is not just the King of the Jews, but the King of all people, everywhere, who have ever lived, died, come, gone before. He is the King over everything, and that's reason enough to celebrate. Today we focus on the whip. Because the Bible talks about how he was bruised for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities, and he was whipped, and he was chastised, and he was beaten to a pulp. And the idea of the whip is symbolic of the torture, the sacrifice that he went through on our behalf. This is what Isaiah 53, 4-6 says. Surely he has borne our griefs, and surely he has carried out our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him. And by his stripes we are made whole. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He paid the price. And every single lash that he received, every single beating that he received, every single bit of pain that he went through, it says in the Bible, the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. It's a stark reminder for me of the cost that salvation, meant. The price that was paid for your salvation, for my salvation, and yet for us, it's a free gift. So today, as we go into the scriptures today, we go in knowing that the price has already been paid. It's a price that you couldn't pay. It's a price that you weren't able to pay, but it has been paid. It's for you and available to us everywhere. And now the idea is how do we live out our faith? How do we live out our salvation? How do we work that out in light of what Jesus paid for us? So I'm going to ask you to turn your Bibles to Acts chapter 22. We've been following, if you're new with us this morning, welcome. We've been following the book of Acts for the past 15 years, and it's been absolutely phenomenal. I see that joke every single Sunday, and every single Sunday I get less and less and less last. Yet I still do it because I'm a sucker for punishment. But anyways, I've loved being able to walk through the book of Acts because it's opened my eyes to the context of the life of Jesus and what he actually went through in the Gospels to now the early church, and how the Gospels prepared the early church for what they have been going through. So I want to encourage you, as you've been going through the book of Acts, you would have heard of stories in Corinth, stories in Ephesus, and these are all different books that are written by Paul about his journey in Acts to the different Gentile lands that he visited. So if you want more information on what really happened in some of those cities, some of those contexts, go ahead, read Corinthians, go ahead, read Ephesians, read Romans. These are all great books that help explain what the overview of Acts is really giving us as we walk through this book. A little bit of a recap. Last week, we found out that Paul is in Jerusalem. I'm not going to go through the whole deal as to why he got into Jerusalem, what he's doing there, but he's there because it's the Feast of Pentecost. And at the Feast of Pentecost, his goal was to bring unity between the Jews and the Gentiles, as both have received Christ, but both are kind of feuding as to who deserves Christ and how they live it out and how they work it out and all that kind of stuff. The Gentile churches have raised a large sum of money for the Christian church in Jerusalem. So Paul takes this opportunity. He's like, I'm going down there for the Feast of Pentecost because it's a high feast. There's going to be millions of people in Jerusalem, in that surrounding area. This is the perfect time to give them the money and to show them that, hey, we're in support of you. We're all on the same team. We're in this together. He does this, and he moves in. The church is great. They're excited. They're saying that, hey, Paul, there's a bit of a challenge here, though. People think that you're against the law. You're not really Jewish, and you're against our God, and all this kind of stuff. You got to work this thing out. So he's working that out. He's trying to show the people there that, hey, it's not just that I'm against the law. I'm not against the law. The law is completed. Jesus completed the law when he spread his arms and he said, it is finished. That was his way of saying the law has been completed, and now there's a new covenant. So it's not that I'm against all that kind of stuff. I'm just trying to show you that this next transitional period is you guys figuring out how now do we live. Because for centuries, you've been living according to the law that was established by Moses, back in the desert. And so for centuries now, you've been living this way. How do you transition out of that way of living into the new way that God is calling you to live? So we're talking about this transition. He's trying to get them to understand this transition. And in the context of that, we come across a few Jewish people from, it says Asia. It's not really Asia, it's the province of Asia. It was, they were ticked off at Paul. And they saw him, and they brought trumped up charges against him, something to the point of, hey, he's brought Gentiles into the temple, which would have been defilement, and the consequence for that would have been death. So they brought this trumped up charge in, which was completely false. And what happens? They start beating Paul. They start literally beating him to a pulp. What happens? The commander of the Roman guard somehow gets word of this, and he's like, oh my goodness, what's going on down there? He thinks it's one of those Egyptian revolutions, and he finds out when he apprehends Paul, he finds out that, hey, this guy is speaking Greek. He's actually not an Egyptian revolutionary. Who is this guy? Paul at that point makes this request, and he says, Commander, let me speak to these people. I don't know what was going through the commander's mind at that point in time or why he would have acquiesced, but he did. He said, okay, sure, you want to speak to them? Fine. The simple fact that Paul was beaten up, bloodied, battered, beaten, beyond recognition, he's still barely able to stand. Nothing new for him. He's been there before. He's done this before. And he comes up in this battered state, and for him, the only thing that he sees is the gospel. I got to get the gospel out. These people need to know the truth. They just don't see it right now. They got to get the truth. And he's so convinced, he's so convicted by the gospel that it doesn't matter his physical state. He's willing to do whatever it costs to get the good news of Jesus Christ out there to anyone who will hear it. It's a reminder to us, isn't it? How convicted are we of the gospel? How convicted are we of the good news of Jesus Christ that we are willing to do whatever it takes to get that message, to get that truth to those people out there that need to hear it? That was last week. This week, we pick up the story in chapter 21 because I kind of left you hanging last week, didn't I? How many of you, I'm just curious, there's no right or wrong answer here, but how many of you actually read chapter 22 because you were just so curious as to what his response would have been? Never mind. I'm not even going to ask. Pretend I didn't ask that question. I just scratch that. We got some work ahead of us. Turn in your Bibles, Acts chapter 22, and we're going to read his response from chapter 1 to verse 1 to verse 22. That's Acts chapter 22. Verse 1 to 22. If you don't have it, your Bible with us, it's going to be on the screens for you. So, brethren and fathers, because he's speaking to a crowd of mainly men here, keep in mind that this was a very male-focused society back then. Brethren and fathers, hear my defense before you now. When they heard that he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, they kept all the more silent. Then he said, I am indeed a Jew born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but I was brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, taught according to the strictness of our father's law, and was zealous toward God as you all are today. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women. Also, the high priest bears me witness, and all the council of the elders, from whom I also received letters to the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring in chains even those who were there to Jerusalem to be punishment. Now, it happened, as I journeyed, and I came near Damascus at about noon, suddenly a great light from heaven shone around me, and I fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So I answered, Who are you, Lord? And he answered and said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. And those who were with me indeed saw the light and were afraid, but they did not hear the voice of him who spoke to me. So I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, Arise and go into Damascus, and there you will be told all things which are appointed for you to do. And since I could not see for the glory of that light, being led by the hand of those who were with me, I came into Damascus. Then there's a certain man, Ananias, a devout man according to the law, having a good testimony with all the Jews who dwelt there. He came to me, and he stood and he said to me, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that same hour I looked up at him. And then he said, The God of your fathers has chosen you that you should know his will, and to see the just one, and hear the voice of his mouth. For you will be his witness to all men of what you have seen and heard. And now why are you waiting? Arise and be baptized, and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Now it happened, when I returned to Jerusalem, and was praying in the temple, that I was in a trance, and saw him saying to me, Make haste, and get out of Jerusalem quickly, for they will not receive your testimony concerning me. So I said, Lord, they know that in every synagogue I imprisoned and beat those who believe on you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I also was standing by, consenting to his death, and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then he said to me, Depart, Paul, for I will send you far from here to the Gentiles. Now, this is an interesting passage, like very, very, very interesting. And again, it's his response. All throughout the book of Acts, what have we seen? The first half of Acts was focused on the story of Peter. After Peter had gone places, after he had been arrested, we always saw that there was this opportunity to speak and to give a defense or to give a declaration or to preach in whatever way, shape, or form. And always that message included in some way, shape, or form some kind of personal experience. And in this one, Paul bases his whole explanation, his whole defense to the people there on his personal experience. And what I find incredibly interesting as we walk into this and we look into this section of Scripture is his use of language. Okay? In the previous chapter, the writer, which is Luke, was quick to point out that when he was faced with the Roman commander, what language did he speak? He spoke in Greek. And he spoke in Greek because that was the main language of Rome at that time. That was the main language that the commander-in-chief would have spoken at that time. And he knew that if he spoke in Greek, that man would know that he was an educated person and that he was not this ruffian revolutionary that they originally thought that he was. He was very strategic in using the language of Greek at this point. And just like he was strategic in using Greek, now he's facing this whole multitude, the crowd that had just sought to destroy him, sought to beat him. He's facing them. And what's he doing? He's now transitioning from the Greek language into the Hebrew language. And the Hebrew language of the day would have been Aramaic. And so I want to walk through this just a little bit. Why did he switch from Greek and why did he go right into Aramaic? What was the significance of him addressing the crowd in Aramaic? Why wouldn't he have just spoken Greek? What's going on here? So, Just like that, Paul flips his language, and it's actually quite a significant moment for a number of reasons. The first reason is this: Aramaic was the very common language of the ordinary Jewish people. So that was kind of like English is to you and me. We might have different backgrounds and different, languages that we might speak, but for many of us here, English is our common language, and for many Jews, the common language for the ordinary Jew would have been Aramaic. What just happened to Paul? He got beat up because the assumption was made that he was embracing the Gentiles, embracing them into the sacred temple, which was a defilement. So for him to speak the language of the Gentiles at this time, it would have been like putting adding fuel to their fire. So he's very strategic in the language being chosen to speak out in, because what is he trying to do? He's trying to win the crowd to Jesus Christ. He's not necessarily trying to defend himself. He doesn't care. His whole mantra is, I don't care if I live or die, I just want people to know Jesus. And so at this point, it's not so much about the defense of himself as it is the defense of the gospel. So he chooses the Aramaic language because the crowd is already so riled up that if he spoke Greek, it would have just added fuel to the fire. Game over. It would have been bad news. But that's not just that's not the only reason he's speaking this language. I think the other reason here is it comes when you understand the crowd that had gathered there was not necessarily 100% pure Jewish. So let's go back to chapter 21, verse 27. And when this whole fiasco started, it started with a group of men from the province of Asia. Now, in that province, here we read the Jews from Asia. Theologians and historians all agree that this is in reference to the city of Ephesus. And again, let me remind you that this is very clearly the province of Asia being referenced here, not the continent, because that would be, there's no way, silly. So province of Asia, Ephesus. Literally everything, if you do your history research, everything about Ephesus was Greek in culture. It was all Greek. From the worship of their gods to the language that was spoken, it was truly a Hellenistic culture. Hellenism is a big word, and don't get scared off by that word. It simply means, when you break it down, Hellenism means a culture that had fully embraced and adopted the Greek culture to replace their own. So these Jews from Ephesus would have been called Hellenistic Jews. Jews by nature, but they've adopted now the Greek culture, and everything about them is Greek. They're still following the Jewish culture, but in a Greek way, if that makes sense. So these are called Hellenistic Jews, meaning that from a very young age, they would have adopted the Greek language instead of the Aramaic language. So Paul, watch this, was intentionally speaking his defense in a language that his original accusers would not have understood. You see, his original accusers accused him of not being Jewish enough. And now Paul is coming in with the very basic, the foundational, the root of the Jewish culture, which is Aramaic, a language that they don't understand, as his way of saying, you don't even understand the language of your forefathers, yet here I am, who you claim not to be truly Jewish, speaking in that language. Who are you? It's his way of kind of sticking it to them and saying, you guys have no idea what you're talking about. I am who I say I am. I am fully Jewish. These are my credentials. And he continues to go on, as we'll see later on, to convince the group there that he is as much a Jew as anyone living there. This is important because he had to meet them where they're at in order to take them where he wanted them to go. We'll get to that a little bit later. The third thing I want you to see here is that it was very strategic. If he was going to earn their trust, he would have to speak their language so that they would understand. It's very simple. Very simple. If he spoke any other language, the mass amount of people there would not have understood the words coming out of his mouth. So the strategy here was very, very, very simple. Well, the majority of people here speak Aramaic, so if I want to get the message of Jesus Christ out there, I'm going to speak Aramaic. Although from various regions, the majority of the crowd there would have understood Aramaic, so it would make sense for Paul to use that language. In other words, Paul chose to meet them where they were at. It's the same strategy he used when he used the Greek language to the Roman commander. And the idea here is that the medium is the message. The message is only as good as the medium through which it travels. Does that make sense? Because if you're speaking the gospel truth to a bunch of Jews in Greek who don't understand the language, the truth can be coming out of your mouth, but they're not receiving it because they do not understand it because it's spoken in a medium that is not their own. Do you see what I'm saying? That Paul was so intent on getting the gospel to these people that the medium was just as important as the message because it contributed to getting the message out there in a way that people would understand. By simply choosing which language to speak, he was saying far more to the intended audience than simply the message he was trying to convey. Again, the medium is the message. If you don't really understand this, I'll use an example of my kids. Because as you know by now, the only examples I've got in life are my kids, and so this is how it rolls. So I never yell at my kids. Like never. Like absolutely never. But if I were one of those parents who happen to yell at kids, none of you guys do that here, I know that, so this is great. We're talking about those people. So if I was one of those people, those parents that yelled at their kids, here's what I would learn very quickly. The words that would be coming out of my mouth towards Calvin would be, or any person, would be very, very, very true. But if you bring it down to Calvin, all he's going to see through my yelling is a red face. All he's going to see is the anger being exhibited through, my actions. He's going to feel the heat of my breath. He's going to feel fear instead of love. But yet the message coming out of my mouth is simply 100% true. Yet the response is completely opposite of the intended result. And so the idea here, the notion here is that the medium is the message. If I want to convey this truth to my son, I've got to do it in a way that he is going to respond. I know that Calvin's a sensitive boy. If you're listening to this one day, son, I love you, and I love that you're sensitive. You're a man. That's awesome. That's okay. Embrace it, brother. Embrace it, son. Embrace it. So he's a sensitive soul, and I know that if I yell at him, it just shuts him off. Like completely shuts him off. And I am learning that in the heat of the moment, I can't do that. I can do that with Clara because I can yell at her, she'll yell right back, and we'll just have this big old yelling match. At the end of the day, we'll hug each other out and be like, we're cool. It's good. Just be on our merry way. But with Calvin, it's completely different. You've got to know your audience, right? If you're going to get the truth of what you want in your heart out to people to hear, you've got to meet them where they're at. This is important because the bottom line is if I'm not communicating truth in a way that he understands, then no matter how good that truth is, he is not going to receive it. This is so important because the Bible teaches us in John 8:32, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. So quite simply and effectively, by Paul speaking Aramaic so that the masses would hear and understand the truth, and they would also know that he really was one of them, a true Jew. You see what Paul's doing here? He's creating that foundation. He's setting the stage. His goal here is to deliver the gospel message, but all he's doing right now before he gets to the gospel is preparing that foundation. He's preparing that soil, if you will, to receive the seed. So many of us are so focused on just spitting out seeds, spitting out seeds, spitting out seeds, and we know that about the parable. But the idea here is he's preparing the soil. He's digging deep. He's doing work. He's getting his hands dirty. He's preparing that foundation, getting it ready to receive the seed of Jesus Christ, the truth. And he's doing it in such a way that he's focusing on the medium so that the message will be heard and received. Last thing, just to harp on that one. I mean, we all know that real Canadians in the room, we all speak here Canadian, English and French, because that's our second language. And if I was up here and I wanted to convey all of this good stuff to you, and it was amazing, it was brilliant, and I spoke in the French language, well, the chances are that only Conrad would get saved, and he's leaving. So, I don't see the point in speaking that. So the reason I'm speaking English is so that you're able to hear it, to understand it. Have I beat that horse dead yet? So the medium here is equally important to the message, because if the medium does not have that flow and it is not able to channel the message in a way that people will understand it and receive it, then you might as well be speaking to the floor. You might as well be speaking to the sky. You might as well be speaking to the wall. I have frustration sometimes when I see, go downtown Hamilton or downtown Toronto, and I see these guys standing on the corner with these bullhorns, and they're just like spitting out like, oh, you're going to hell, you're going to hell. If you don't accept Jesus, it's fire and brimstone and stuff. And I'm thinking, man, the words coming out of his mouth are actually quite true. But I don't see any people stopping, getting on their knees, and confessing to Jesus for the love that he offers them through the sacrifice that he paid. What I see is people coming up to him and arguing. I see that method, even though the message is true, the method is flawed on that one. You see what I'm saying here? The message and the method, they have to go hand in hand, otherwise the message will never be heard. So, if you look throughout the rest of Paul's short sermon, it's absolutely genius. So I do this for a living. I speak, and I'm working on it. I got a few more years ahead of me, so I can polish this thing up. But Paul, this guy was absolutely genius. And if you're like a linguist here, or you're into words and you're into like reading and all that kind of putting together English stuff, I'm just gonna sit down because it's just one of those days. Conrad, I blame you, man. I love you, buddy. I love you. I'm going to miss you. Anyways, all I'm trying to say is his message is genius. How he sets it up, how he prepares the foundation and brings them along with him is absolutely genius. And he continues, he meets them with where they're at by establishing common ground with them with his shared experiences. I'm not saying I'm awesome, but I do this a lot with my kids, right? You see that every Sunday. I give you this, stupid anecdote of my kids, because most of you can relate, because you've either got kids that are exactly like that, or you had kids that were exactly like that, or now your kids have kids that are exactly like that, or you're so young that you remember when you were a kid and you were exactly like that. So it kind of hits all people. So Paul continues with his defense with the intent of showing the whole crowd that he was indeed as much of a Jew to all of them as all of them, and maybe even more so. So in verse 4, he goes on to say, hey, I was born in Tarsus, and I was educated in Jerusalem. Like, my roots are like Jewish. Like, this is who I am. Do you remember the teacher Gamaliel? Well, he was my teacher too. He was the most respected and revered teacher of the law during that time period. Everyone respected him. The law that he brought out, the teaching and the constructs that he brought out, everyone was like, this guy is this, follow this guy. And in fact, his official title wasn't even Rabbi Gamaliel. It would have been Rabban Gamaliel. And the difference in there is telling, because Rabbi Gamaliel means my teacher, whereas Rabban Gamaliel means our teacher. And the significance here is that many of the people in that crowd, many of them standing there would have understood that Rabban Gamaliel was also their teacher. He taught them, he walked through them. So what Paul's doing again is he's creating this shared experience so that he can get them to understand where he's at, so that he can take them where he needs them to go. He then continues by relating to the crowd on their own terms. In verse 3, he basically says that he was very zealous toward God. And this is fascinating here. And he follows up by saying, as you all are here today. This is important because he uses this as a transition in how he used to persecute Christians. What he's really doing here is saying, look, I know why you beat me up. I get it. I understand. You think that your action here is actually pleasing God because that's what I used to think. And he uses this shared experience to get them on his page, to get them to understand where he's at, so that when he says where he wants to go, they'll be able to see that transition. So he relates to them. He's like, I used to be like you. I used to be the guy out there killing every member of the way. And I wouldn't just kill the men, I would kill the women. I would just go, full steam ahead and I was just doing it. Just like you guys, that zealous zeal in my heart, that's exactly where you are. That's exactly where I was. He brings that to them and says, listen, this is the shared experience. Now, as he continues through the next few verses to describe his road to Damascus conversion experience, we see that in verse 8, his testimony hits a bit of a climax as he relays his experience of seeing the bright light. And it says here, so I answered, who are you, Lord? And he said to me, because he recognized that this was Lord, the capital L, and he said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. So at this point, Jesus was long since dead, and every Jew, mainly, many Jews and Pharisees who still held to the law, believed that the disciples or some kind of conspiracy had happened, and they had, basically either hidden the body or just tried to say that it really didn't happen, and they just kind of began to teach this thing away that, this was a conspiracy. There were rumors of Jesus coming back from the dead, but those were just rumors to many Jewish diehards. Now, all of a sudden, Jesus is standing in front of Paul and declaring that he is God. The God that Paul was trying to please is actually the same one that he was trying to kill. And then the realization hits him like a ton of bricks. Jesus of Nazareth is God. And for the Jewish person who was persecuting those that were following Jesus, to all of a sudden come to this realization that, oh my goodness, my whole life, everything I've been doing for God, I've actually been doing against God. It would have hit him like a ton of bricks. And he knows that if he tells the Jewish people here today that Jesus of Nazareth is God, it's going to hit them like a ton of bricks. So this is why he sets it up. This is why he builds that foundation. This is why he meets them where they are at, so that he can take them where he needs them to go and give them a fighting chance at receiving the truth that Jesus of Nazareth is God. And this really is the point of his message. And all of his connecting and relating previously seems to be paying off. And at this point, I imagine that they actually seem to be receiving it. I imagine what the ears there would have been, or the eyes there, the response. In that moment, we get this idea that this might actually work. It might actually take, because he's brought them from over here to over here. And this is incredibly powerful stuff. I mean, I can imagine many people that are actually starting to hear what Paul is laying down. I mean, conviction is starting to sink in. Everything seems to be going great until the end, when Paul mentions that this truth is not just for the Jews, but for the Gentiles too. And this is where the train just goes off the track. it's as if, no, it doesn't even go off the track. It's like 120 miles an hour. It's just going, going, going. There's a big old brick wall. It just hits that brick wall, and it's full stop. Nothing else getting past it. Paul had just crossed the line. Because we see that, we read up to verse 21, and then he said to me, depart, for I will send you far from here to the Gentiles. In verse 22, it says, and they listened to him until this word, and then they raised their voices and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he is not fit to live. How do you go from, we're tracking with you, Paul, we're there, yeah, to all of a sudden, kill him? It's like night and day. It's almost bipolar. It's like they're there, and all of a sudden, boom, they just done. It's a complete that's what that is. And in that moment, I remember praying into this, and I was like, man, God, what's going on here? They just couldn't get it. No matter how much Paul met them where they're at, no matter how powerful his testimony was, no matter how much he had brought that shared experience in, hear this, it was their prejudice that blinded them from the truth. Paul did everything right. Everything right. From a speaker, preacher, teacher point of view, that sermon, gold. Laid out perfectly. I'm crying. I'm like, it's beautiful. He did everything right. But it was their prejudice that blinded them from the truth. And that, my friends, is a scary thing. Last week we touched on the dangers of following tradition over truth, and this falls into that same kind of category. And it's so devastating when prejudice blinds us from truth. Here's what Webster's dictionary defines prejudice as: a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. Basically, prejudice, if you want to break it down, prejudice is just, it's all in your head. It's this preconceived notion or opinion that you've already concocted. It's not based on reason or anything factual. It's based on what's going on in your mind and not based on reason or actual experience. And don't kid yourselves. Prejudice doesn't just exist in other people. We are faced with it every day. And it's something that we need to war against because the gospel is for all people everywhere. Full stop. And if we aren't careful, prejudice will come like a cloud and blind us from the truth as well. When I was at Queensway, there was a guy in my young adults group. He was kind of, just kind of hanging out there. He was mid-20s. And he was, working with one of the other pastors. And one of the other pastors at this stage of the game was trying to encourage him to get into Bible college. He wanted to become a youth pastor. And I remember looking at that guy and being like, bro, that ship has sailed. Like, you're late 20s already. And you're looking to get married. I mean, you've got everything up against you. I mean, I'm looking at him and I'm like, I don't even think you have that gift. I never said this to him. Whoa, hold up now. Can you imagine that? I never said that to him, but I was like, yeah, that's great. In the back of my mind, I'm like, no, it's not. You're just gonna, you're gonna mess your life up. That was a prejudice that I had towards this guy. That guy today is married. He's got 2 kids. He's a youth pastor in the GTA. He's doing incredible things for the kingdom of God, and he's just doing a fantastic job. And I often think to myself, man, if I had embraced him back in the day, how much more could I have encouraged him along his journey? How much more could I have been a part of his journey instead of being like, yeah, that ship has sailed, buddy. But that ship hadn't sailed. It was my prejudice on who he was and what he was and all this kind of stuff. It was a preconceived opinion that I had formed about him that had no factual base or grounding or anything to stand upon. It was all in my head, and I was wrong in having a prejudice towards him. God showed me that. He showed that to me. So fast forward a few years when I leave Queensway and I come here, and they're trying to find someone to fill in for me over there. And I'm like, God, just get the right person in there. Get the right pastor. Get the right guy in there. Just make it happen, Lord. Just get, and I'm just praying this as a general prayer. And then I find out that the person they have replacing me in the young adult department as the young adult pastor is not actually a pastor. It's a scientist. And she loves science. And she's got no Bible college training or anything like that. And when I first heard this, I was just like, huh? I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I went to school for X amount of years. I suffered through this, and I barely got into that position. And you just hired you hired a scientist? Again, God took that prejudice, and she is doing a way better. Like, she's taken what I kind of started there and taken it to the next level. And I'm looking at that, and I'm like, I couldn't do that. She was able to do what I couldn't do, because her gift mix is exactly what God created for that position. And God, forgive me for having that prejudice, that preconceived opinion in my heart that was not based on any factual evidence or anything of the sort or any reason or actual experience. Prejudice will blind you from the truth. It will blind you from the truth because that's what it seeks to do. It is not based on reason. It is not based on truth. It is everything against the truth. So the question remains, why on earth did Paul even mention the Gentiles? If the point of his whole sermon was to get them to embrace Jesus of Nazareth as God, why on earth did he even feel it necessary to bring the Gentiles into it if he knew that that was such a volatile point for them? Why would he just leave that alone? Hit it at a different time. Maybe blend it in later when you've got them. Like, why? It seems to go against everything that he just used to preach about. Because the reality is this: no matter how much you bring people with you, no matter how much you have shared experiences, no matter what you do or how you do it, the reality is that if prejudice is not dealt with, it will blind you from the truth. It will stop you, full stop, from receiving the truth, entering into the truth, embracing it, and living it out, because the gospel is not the gospel if it's not for all people. The gospel is not the gospel if it's not the gospel for all people everywhere. That's why he brought it out. Because they had a problem with prejudice. And it was sucking them dry. It was killing them. And they could not get over it. And as a result, they rejected Jesus. They rejected their Messiah. And to this day, they still reject him. Because prejudice blinds us from the truth. And if you can't see that through them, and if you can see that through them, then I hope that you can be able to see that in your life and in my life today. I've given you experience in my life. It blinds us from the truth. Because the gospel is not the gospel if it's not for all people. So in order for them to truly accept Jesus of Nazareth as God, it would mean letting go of their prejudice against the Gentiles, and they were not prepared to do that. And unfortunately, that prejudice led to their rejection of the gospel. Is there prejudice in your heart today? Are there preconceived notions, preconceived opinions that are not based on reason or actual experience that are blinding you from parts of the truth? Be real with yourself. I'm not looking for, be real, dig deep. Are you prejudiced? Are you prejudiced? Are there little seeds there that need to be squished, ground out? The truth is this, that God's grace, it covers all that, doesn't it? It covers that multitude of ways. I've learned that. I've seen that in my life. And the gospel is not the gospel unless the gospel is for all people, everywhere on this earth. It's our responsibility to figure out how to take that message and build a method around it to bring it to all people everywhere so that they will come to know the Lord Jesus as their personal Savior. And when they do, he wins.